You're listening to the Westminster-Canterbury Tales podcast, creating community to foster joy and well-being. Thanks for listening.
Hello, my name is Amy Shire, and welcome to the Westminster-Canterbury Tales podcast. In this edition of Tell Me a Story, I have the privilege of speaking with Westminster-Canterbury resident Michael Pawlukiewicz. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
First of all, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Absolutely. Great job. Thank you.
And Pawlukiewicz, what nationality is that?
Oh, my parents are both Polish. And interesting, just a small diversion. Both of my parents were born in the United States, but taken back to Poland as children, and they grew up in Poland and came back in the period between the two wars. I met here, and here I am.
Which leads me sort of to my next question is, when and where were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York, a native New Yorker, grew up in New York City, riding the subways, going to Brooklyn Technical High School, and I loved it. I still love New York.
And tell me a little bit about your family and a little bit more about where you grew up.
I was born in Brooklyn and moved to Queens, when I was a child. And I grew up in a place that was Irish, but my community, my family community was Polish. So when we had family gatherings, it was all very Polish. We go to Polish weddings and we'd have baptisms and all kinds of interesting things. On the other hand, in the neighborhood, all my friends were Irish. We would have an annual football game among the kids. It was the Irish International game. And the Irish kids would have to play all the other kids. So that's growing up in New York. It was great, and I loved it.
Let's talk a little bit about school. What kind of student were you? And when you were in school, besides your studies, what were you interested in? Did you have any extracurriculars?
Right, I went to Brooklyn Tech, which was a engineering high school. It's a magnet school. It's a very, 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 I want to say prestigious, but I didn't add to the prestige while I was there. Graduated 986 out of 1,010, and I had to take. In Brooklyn Tech, you take every course. You don't have like free time, and I had to take every course twice because I failed them all. I had an issue of, I guess I didn't believe in myself. I was a lazy kid, didn't do my homework, and, that's what happens when you end up at the bottom of your class. But that was all to change.
Which we'll be talking about. Did you have any extracurriculars? Were you a sports guy?
I played football. And I played baseball. I belonged to the church baseball team, and but that when we used to play stickball and all those street games you hear about from New York, stickball and box ball, stoop ball, and that was we used to play in the streets, but. Nowadays you can't play in the streets. There's too many cars, but in those days it wasn't so bad.
I ask this because I know further when you get into your career, you have a musical ability, or you have. So were you involved in any music?
Right, sure. I studied accordion. A Polish kid, got to play the accordion, and I always sang. I was fearless about singing, and people are often very shy about opening their mouth, but for some reason I just loved to sing, and I sang, and I was always trying to get into choirs and singing groups and stuff. When it starts to sing, I would join up. I'm there, We'll
talk about your perfect pitch later on in your career. So after high school, what was your next step? Did you go to college?
No, I did. I went to Southeast Missouri State College because it was the only one I could get into, and actually it was fun. I mean, I went there for a year, and as I was mostly successful at theater. I belonged to the theater group, and we did a lot of plays, and I really loved that. In academics, not so much. And I was doing poorly. I always carried over my bad habits from high school into college, and so I was not a good fit for me. And then I dropped out and went back to New York, and I started getting jobs. In those days, the minimum wage was $1 an hour. I made $40 a week. Mostly, I worked in banks. I don't know why. I became an IBM trainee and worked on the IBM machines with the punch cards and all that stuff. And I ended up in a job. Actually, I was doing pretty well. I became like a leading bookkeeper in the bank I was working in. But the place got kind of toxic, and I felt like I had to leave. I dreaded going back out on the street looking for a job and with a draft rating A1. People are always hesitant to sign you up. Now, this is before the Vietnam War. I mean, the war was, they had advisors in there, but it wasn't like the real war hadn't started yet. And I dreaded going around trying to convince people that they should hire me, and I also dreaded probably going back to minimum wage and trying to prove my way back up to where I was. So I was riding the subway, and I was thinking about joining the Navy because I longed to go to sea. I remember in New York Harbor, you'd see the ships, and I'd always be captivated by the ships tied up at the docks and steaming through the harbor. And I said, I want to go to sea. But I thought, in the Navy, you sit there and polish guns and wait for war. Or train. And I said, I want to do something more than that. And then I looked up and I saw a poster with a big icebreaker on it. It says U.S. Coast Guard. And I did a little research. I found out the Coast Guard does all this work, like search and rescue and lots of other weather patrols. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But when wartime came, the Coast Guard would be subsumed into the Navy. And I said, that's perfect. I mean, I'll have a real thing to do while I'm, a young man and no war. And if a war comes, I'll be in the Navy where I want to be. And so I went to see my recruiter, and they picked me. But the thing was, I told them, see, the Coast Guard has a little higher standard. I won't say why they picked me, because you have to pass a test, and it's the toughest test of all the, intelligence tests that they give you in the services. So the Coast Guard's the hardest service to pass that test. So I passed that test. And then I talked to the recruiter. I said, the Coast Guard is famous for having little boats around the coast and helping people with their boating issues and stuff. I don't want to do that. I want to go to sea. How can I go to sea? He says, well, you get a rating that goes to sea, a sea rating, like sonarman. I said, okay, I want to be a sonarman because I want to go to sea. Sonarmen don't work on little boats in the harbor. You have to go on a ship that has anti-submarine warfare. See, so okay. I said I'll do. I'm going to sign up, and I want to be a sonarman. So you go to boot camp, and then they'll, you take a test, and they'll figure out if you're good enough. And so. I did. I went to boot camp, and boot camp was good. It got me in shape.
Where was boot camp?
In Cape May, New Jersey.
Okay.
It was in winter. It was very cold. I remember one night the harbor froze over. It was really cold, but at came time they say, okay, it's time for the sonar test. Anybody who wants to take the sonar test, come on and join in. So I went. There were 100 young men that took the sonar test, and it's just like I got the headphone on now. Just you put on the headphone, and it's you listen to things, and they say tell them how the pitch changes. Does the pitch go up? Does the pitch go down? And you have to just fill in the blanks, up, down, same. And I did that, and out of 100 guys, 3 of us passed this test. And it turns out that musical ability has a lot to do with pitch memory, and because the sonarman in sonar, the sonar pings, and you hear that the sound of the echo, or not the echo, but the sound going out. I don't want to make the sonar sound, but it goes out, and when it bounces back off the submarine or whatever the target is, if the target's moving towards you, just like there's the Doppler effect, and it squeezes all those sound things together, so when it reaches you, it's got a higher pitch. If it's moving away from you, it stretches those sound waves out, and it makes a lower pitch. So you can tell by listening whether the submarine is coming or going, or if it's just what they call a beam aspect, so that it's just that pitch is just staying the same. And that's the whole idea of the pitch memory and ability to distinguish pitches is what made me, and I loved being a sonarman, although I did very little of that. I was mostly doing radar work, which is a lot of fun too. We worked with the Weather Bureau, and maybe we want to talk about that separately. I don't know.
What kind of training did they give you as far as being a sonarman?
Right. Well, I went to Key West, Florida for about 4 months of training.
And how old are you
At this point, it's interesting. On my way to Key West, I turned 21. I remember going into a bar. We stopped, me and my friend who were going to school, we stopped in Orlando. I mean, back in those days, I don't know why we stopped in Orlando, but I guess it was the way that travel worked in the 1960s. And
no Disney World there at that point.
No Disney World, right. And we stopped in Orlando, and we were in a motel, and I said, I'm going to get some beers, So I went, there was a tavern right around the corner. I went to this tavern, and I ordered a 6-pack, and the guy said, let me see your ID. So I whip out my ID, and I hand it to him, and he's looking at it, and I said, I'm going to turn 21 in 4 hours. And he said, okay, I'll give you the 6-pack.
Happy birthday.
And so that was my, I turned 21. But anyway, so and Key West, it was. I have so many Key West stories. I don't know where to go with this, but we did very well in school there. I did. I mean, we studied electronics, and we did a lot of simulations, in being sitting in a dark room with this machine that's like being on a ship but isn't, and it's a sonar machine, and you got this target on the machine, and you have to chase it, and do the whole attack thing. I mean, I don't do it. I just give the bearings and ranges to the target, and the other guys who do the shooting do that.
It must have been interesting having probably drew people from all over the country, just a real mix of people. Although I think you're living in Brooklyn, you probably dealt with a whole mix of people.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, to this day, I still have a facility with languages. I mean, I only speak English. I'm really not, but I know Polish pretty well. I know Italian. I know, Spanish, of course, and I know I could tell a language. I can tell the difference between Cantonese and Mandarin. I mean, just from riding the subways, you hear so many languages. And you get to know who the people are and what their life is, and you get the. I mean, maybe it's also part of the musical thing, just to hear and understand the intonations and what all of people's languages. I've always I'm good at imitating languages too.
So you had this whole group of people who've come to Key West, and you're all together in the dark, learning your sonar skills.
Right.
What was it like? Did you all go out afterwards?
Well, we used to go. What we used to do, excuse me, practically every day we would go to the beach, and we would go snorkeling. That was the thing to do. And I remember my first day in Key West, it was in March, and I walked out from the barracks in my T-shirt, which is a uniform. It was hot, so the T-shirt was a uniform of the day. And I went to the PX, and I came back, and I had a sunburn. And one day, just walking on the street for 15 minutes, I got a sunburn. By the time I left in August, I was tan. I could lie on the beach for 3 hours and just tan. There was no more sunburn, and because I was also snorkeling for hours at a day. I also had a great tan on my back.
So how long were you down in Key West for training?
Well, so from March until August. What's that, about 4 months? 3 or 4 months, something like that.
And then where did they send you after that?
This is where the Coast Guard begins to change my life, because I was really excited about being in the Coast Guard and being a sonarman and eventually going to sea. And I was very motivated about all that, and I wanted to succeed. So I found out in sonar school that I was smart. I could learn all this stuff. Where in high school I didn't succeed, and I never got positive feedback from the system, so to speak. But here, I was working hard and I was succeeding, and I ended up graduating with distinction. And what happened then was we got, at the end of when we graduated, we had to get our duty assignments. And I got first pick because, the guy at the top in the class gets to pick the first. Of all the duty assignments, I could pick any one I wanted. And then he went down through the class, and the poor guy at the bottom get whatever's left over. And so I picked Hawaii. I said, why not go to Hawaii, And so I was sent to the Coast Guard cutter Chautauqua in Honolulu, Hawaii. And the Chautauqua was what's called a weather cutter. And in those days, the Coast Guard, there were no weather satellites. So the Coast Guard used to be what today are the weather satellites. And we were out there, we were in the Coast Guard, but our place to go was the middle of the ocean, as far away from the coast as you could get. And we would go to Ocean Station, which in the Pacific, we would go to Ocean Station Victor, which was halfway between Midway Island, which was the end of the Hawaiian archipelago, and Japan, halfway across, so that not only were you in the middle of the ocean, but we could also monitor air traffic across the Pacific. We were part of the distant early warning system.
An ocean station is just a place in the ocean.
It's a place in the ocean.
There's no island. There's no.
No, nothing. Just a grid, an imaginary grid, and you navigate to that point. And
how big was the ship that you were on?
This ship was a 255-foot cutter, kind of like a destroyer escort, maybe a little smaller than that. We had 130 men on the ship. Nowadays, they also have women, but in those days, it was all men. And as I said, we were doing weather, so we had actually Weather Bureau personnel on board, a couple of guys who were the heart of the weather program. And our first mission out there was to do weather, although we were monitoring aircraft traffic, and we were assisting aircraft by giving them, we would track them on radar and give them their airspeed and or ground speed rather, and their course and speed and whatever, and they would check in with us and tell us what they, how they were doing and how many passengers they had, and in case they needed to, if they had an issue and they couldn't resolve it and they couldn't reach land, we were there to help them ditch. And
what does that mean?
That means the aircraft lands on the water. And just like the guy, remember, what's his name? The movie, they made the movie of the pilot who took off from LaGuardia Airport and Sully, that's right, and ditched in the East River.
Oh.
And that made him famous because he ditched his plane in the East River. Well, that's what we were trained to do, was to help planes ditch. And it actually only happened once in the whole history of the ocean station systems. But it happened on Ocean Station November, which was the ocean station between Hawaii and the West Coast. And that was a very successful ditching. Everybody was safe, and it worked out very well. So we like to think that we were there for also that good Coast Guard helping people on the water, right? Good Coast Guard reason.
I'm still stuck on the fact that I'm so used to having weather satellites telling us everything, and
we used to send up balloons. We had 4 balloons a day. Two of them had transmitters that would transmit, weather. Temperature and humidity and all that stuff. But we were tracking them on radar to get the wind speeds, winds aloft they call that, and we'd have a big track table. A big tracking table and plot it out, plot that balloon tracking out, and then the weathermen would be able to, they had instruments that could tell them how fast that balloon was moving, and then all that would get sent back to Washington and integrated into the weather prediction system.
Did you ever have to deal with really bad weather when you were out on the seas?
Yeah, absolutely. I have here's a sea story. It's a short one. We were in a storm, and we had to turn the ship such that it was going into the waves and regardless of where we were headed, we had to go into the waves because it was a big storm, and but it was the wind. The wind actually was on the what we call the starboard side. I was on my ship. My compartment that I was working in was on the port side. So the wind, that's the leeward side. So the wind would blow on the windward side, and on the leeward side you didn't have the wind. So we had the door open, and I was looking out the door, and I was on the bridge deck, which is about 30 feet above the water, and I'm looking out at the sea, and I see this wave climb above the horizon. And I said, and I'm looking up. It's not right here. It's off in the distance. And I'm looking up and said, that wave is higher than I am right now, and I'm 30 feet above the water, And I'm looking at the wave, and the wave comes, and all of a sudden the ship starts to roll. And I'm standing there, and all of a sudden the deck is in my hands, and I'm on my knees, and the ship is rolling, and right now I've got goosebumps remembering this. Please stop, please stop. And then it hits a point where you hear stuff breaking loose, crash, bam. Everything is secured, but only to a certain point. Right. And all, plates and dishes and pencils and things are flying everywhere. And it stopped. Thank God it stopped, and then it rolls back the other way. And that was scary. But that's a short one, a short sea story.
Was that like in a hurricane or just regular?
No, it was just this rough weather at sea. That's all. It wasn't a hurricane or anything like that. No, we wouldn't have had the doors open in a hurricane. No.
Did you ever get used to the rough weather, or was it
absolutely.
always
But you talk about seasickness. In terms of like nausea and stuff, I had that the first time out, and which is you kind of have to go through that. But you would still get sick in the sense that you couldn't do anything. There were times it was so rough, all you could do was go on watch and come off watch and get in bed and just lie in bed and hug the mattress. And and it would come around with sandwiches. And that was dinner. That's all they wouldn't expect you to show up in the mess deck and put out a tray to get food. No way, that's not going to happen. Here's a sandwich, and you get banged up like that too. So, and it's kind of being sick. I always thought it as that's also being seasick, but another way.
So, how long were you out at sea with your duty out of the Hawaii?
Sure. Well, we would leave Honolulu, and we'd spend about a week. We'd go out to Midway to refuel, and it'd take us about 3 or 4 days to get out to Ocean Station Victor, and we'd relieve the ship that was there. And the system was, we'd relieve that ship, and then that ship would go into Japan. And they would have time off, rest and recreation, R&R is what they called it. And then they would come back and relieve us, and we would go into Japan, and we would have our R&R and.
So how long were you out
at sea? We were about 4 weeks at a time. So it was like maybe 5 or 6 weeks. That was the whole cruise. You would go out, stay on station, and then go into Japan, then come back out, stay on station, go back to Honolulu. So it was like every 6 months you would do one of these, and it was the whole thing took a couple of months. So spent a lot of time out there on the water, which I loved it.
So you did the weather stations. You helped the Air Force, or just all planes?
All planes. Well, most of them were commercial. Clipper One, and Clipper One was going one direction. That's Pan Am was Clippers, and Clipper One was a trip. I think it went from west to east, and then Clipper 2 would be the one coming back the other way. And you would have Air Force and others, Navy, a lot of Navy aircraft, but mostly commercial. And and once in a while, because we were distant early warning, sometimes we had a beacon that was on our ship, a radio beacon, so they could always hear us and know where we were, and know by the bearing and distance from what grid we were on our station. They could get their fix on their own navigation, where they were in the world. Because this was, again, before GPS and that kind of stuff. So
you were like human GPS for them.
That's right. We were there to help people find their way across the ocean, exactly. And if they needed help, we were there to help them.
Wow. Just amazes me. And then how long were you stationed in Hawaii, and then what was your next step?
Okay. Well, I was stationed in Hawaii for about 2.5 years. And at one point, because sonarmen have a kind of relationship with the ocean, we used to have, because sound travels through the water, so we had to understand the physics of sound in water, and there are these changes in temperature, and the changes in temperature can affect how the sonar finds or doesn't find its target. So we were then. But the Coast Guard was then taking on a mission of oceanography. And I was selected as a sonarman to go to oceanography school in Connecticut, which I did at some stage in my Honolulu career. And I came back, and this is 1965, during the geophysical year, which was a year, as I recall it, where the whole world was studying the Earth, including the oceans and what have you. So we did as part of the geophysical year, the United States contribution to the geophysical year, my ship, the Chautauqua, did a survey, an oceanographic survey of the Kuroshio Current, which is the Asian equivalent of the Gulf Stream. It comes up the coast of Japan and arcs over across the Bering Sea. And then they grow these giant cabbages in Alaska, believe it or not, because they have nice weather there in the summer. and then it comes down the coast. So you see, like in Oregon and Washington, weather is milder than it is at other latitudes like that. So that we had to do what we called Nansen casts, where you would go down and collect water samples at great depth. We had huge cables that would take these sample bottles down, and we also did plankton tows, collecting organisms from the ocean, fish and plankton and what have you. And an interesting, makes me think of a little interesting thing. My wife, after I got married after I got out of the Coast Guard, and we lived in Washington, D.C. For a long time. But my wife, when we first moved there, she got a job at the Smithsonian working in their oceanographic area. She was also a biology person. She had gotten her degree in biology, so she was a biological technician. And they had all these samples from all kinds of different cruises and whatever. And she was up looking through samples, and she found my samples from when I collected plankton toes and what all in the Pacific in the geophysical years.
It was like destiny.
She came home and says, "I found your stuff."
You were meant to be married. So you were doing all of this while you were based in Connecticut?
No. I did this Connecticut school, and then I went back to the ship in Honolulu.
Okay.
I think I even said that. So
okay.
So yeah, it was on the Chautauqua that we, and the Kuroshio Current is in Japan. So yeah, and then I went back to after that. Well, I have a sea story though concerning.
Oh, absolutely.
Concerning
Share it with us.
one of my this is actually I can call this my favorite sea story. I have one that's more exciting, but this one is a wonderful story, and it's short too. So one day I was on watch, a radar watch. We're on station, so we're just drifting in the ocean, and it's a nice summer day. It's calm, blue sky, and it's lovely. So and again, the door is open. I'm doing the radar air search radar, but I can still look at the radar and then look out the door and see the sky, and it's just sitting wonderful. And I looked over, and then that the surface radar was just behind me, and I looked over at the surface radar and I saw what looked like a squall line on the radar, and I said, "What is that?" And so I got up and I went and I looked out the door and to where the squall line was supposed to be, and there was really nothing there. I could see some white water, and I'm watching, and all of a sudden up close I can see fins coming out of the water and porpoises jumping out of the water, and I got out of I left the radar shack, and I got out on the deck, and I'm looking around, and all around, as far as I can see, are porpoises. Thousands of porpoises. Again, I got the goosebumps just now. Think about it. And nobody else noticed. I'm standing up there as a lookout on the top, and there's this officer of the deck in the bridge, and I said, "Hey guys, anybody want to take a look at this?" And it was so exciting, and we got the ship underway. I turned on the sonar, actually not the sonar, but what we call the underwater telephone, which is a sonar apparatus. You can talk through the water to another ship. And I turned on this telephone, and you could hear the porpoises chirping through the transponder for the underwater telephone. And we started chirping back, and we had a great time. And it was a wonderful experience. And now I've learned they call that a megapod of porpoises. And why were they in the middle of the ocean? They must have been something special going on, but you wouldn't expect them to.
No.
The middle of the ocean is not the most fertile place for fishing or catching fish or whatever, but maybe they were following something out there. I don't know, but it was an amazing experience.
Wow. And what was you had one other sea story you were saying?
Right. Well, that was, the other one is kind of more exciting, I guess. This the porpoise one is beautiful, but this one, after I served on the Chautauqua, I was transferred back to New York because I was recruited in New York, and I wasn't planning to re-enlist. So they sent me back to New York for my final duty station, so they wouldn't have to pay my airfare to get me home. And so I was stationed then on the Coast Guard cutter Spencer out of New York City and Staten Island, and the Spencer was a 311-foot Coast Guard cutter, a little bigger than 255. They're more like a destroyer escort, maybe that size. But anyway, we were on duty I say we were on duty. My ship was on duty for search and rescue or whatever was necessary over the 4th of July weekend. Now, what happened in New York Harbor was, this is in 1966. In June of 1966, there was a collision. Two ships collided it's a place right between Staten Island and New Jersey. It's called Kill Van Kull, and one ship, which was a Alpha Cape, which was a tanker carrying naphtha. Naphtha is like lighter fluid, and that ship collided with the Texaco, Massachusetts, which was coming out of Newark Bay, which Kill Van Kull enters. Newark Bay. They collided there and both ships had tugboats helping them. And one was leaving New York, the other one was coming in.
And one had lighter fluid, and one had oil.
Oh, actually, that one didn't have anything. Oh. It had discharged all its cargo, and it was heading out to get more. And it then collided, and there was a huge fire. 34 people died in this accident. It's a terrible tragedy. The two tugboats and the Texaco, Massachusetts, were sent to yards to get repaired, and the Alva Cape was, which had 3 million gallons of naphtha on board, was then taken to Gravesend Bay, which is Gravesend is just at the just south of the eastern end of the Verrazano Bridge, which, as a New Yorker, we used to call it Verrett's Narrow Bridge, but with the Verrazano Bridge, and it was tied up there, and with the idea of they were going to salvage the rest of the naphtha that was in the ship. And it was 4th of July weekend when that was going on, and it was a very hot weekend, and naphtha has a very low flash point, so it went up again.
Oh, wow.
And 4 more people were killed.
Oh, my.
And I remember seeing, we were called out because the mayor said, I want that ship out of here, and get that ship out of here now. And so they had a little trouble getting tugboats, but they got a couple of Moran tugboats, and we went to escort them. And our job then was going to be to scuttle this ship at sea. And
scuttle means?
Means to sink it. And I remember as we approached the scene, because we had to go to New Jersey to get ammunition in order to scuttle this thing, and I coming to the Verrazano Bridge, here was this huge scorch mark across the Verrazano Bridge where this thing had exploded just a few days ago. And so the 2 tugs and the Coast Guard cutter Spencer took this ship out 150 miles offshore, and we were charged with sinking it. And they gave us anti-aircraft ammunition, which is a funny kind of a thing, because if you have surface ammunition, I think they probably only had, we had a 5-inch gun, and any aircraft ammunition penetrates and then explodes. Surface ammunition explodes on contact. So if you have surface ammunition, it hits the ship and blows a big hole in it, and then the ship will sink. Well, in this case, we're shooting anti-aircraft ammunition, making tiny pinholes in the side of the ship, and the stuff is exploding inside, and this naphtha is going crazy, burning, huge explosions going off, but there's just little tiny holes in the hull, and they used up all the ammunition, and we're all standing there saying, oh my goodness, is it? And the New York News has got a helicopter. What happens if it doesn't sink? But praise God, it went down, and it was kind of exciting. I mean, I turned the sonar on because it kind of, how ships will do that. They just fold in half and go down. And so I turned the sonar on, and I was pinging off this, this wreckage as it was sinking. And this reminds me though of this Coast Guard cutter was old. I mean, it was built in the 30s. So here it is, 1966. It's probably like 35 years old, and it had been through the war, so it had Navy paint and Coast Guard paint and many layers of paint. And while they were shooting the guns, I was in what they call the Combat Information Center, where all the radar and sonar and tracking. The guns go off, and then the paint starts to fall off. All the wires and stuff in the ceiling, all this stuff is coming down. You got to brush yourself off every time a gun goes off. But that was kind of part of the humor of the thing. But then, finally the ship went down, and that was quite dramatic too. Of course, and these explosions going off. Which you have that sense of it's off in the distance, so you see the thing explode, and then whoomp, it hits you later. And but then after it was gone, we had to go and patrol the area to make sure there weren't any hazards of to navigation left adrift. And so we're cruising through this area where the ship had sank, and by that time now they had secured all the special detail that you had to have for this this business of scuttling. And I had left the Combat Information Center. I was down on deck in the stern portion, and they call it the fantail. And you kind of hang out. Guys hang out on the fantail and chew the fat. And I'm looking at the wake, the wake of the ship as it's passing through this water, and the wake is in flames. It's like we're the devil's ship, and the flames are coming out. And I don't know, maybe some scientist can explain to me how this naphtha catches fire after it's been in the water and the ship's propeller goes through it and feeds it oxygen. I'm sure there's some, but it was just astonishing to see the flames floating on the wake out there. And only in a wake. It wasn't like there was fire everywhere, just only in our wake. So that's my exciting sea story.
So after, so how long were you based in Connecticcut for?
Well, not just
in New York for?
In New York. Well, for about a year, just about a year. Of course, we also did ocean stations in the Atlantic, by the way. I did 2 ocean stations in the Atlantic, but there were more of them, because there's a lot more of traffic. It's a shorter distance, for one thing. A lot more traffic between Europe and United States and North America than there was in the Pacific. So it was very busy. We had to do a lot of aircraft work in the Atlantic, but also we did the weather work, and the weather always had priority unless there was an emergency, and then the weather would. But that was our mission, was the weather. So all the aircraft stuff had to kind of take the background while we did the balloon tracking.
So it seems to me that your time in the Coast Guard really shaped you as a person. You gained confidence, and you realized just who you were and how smart you were, and it seems
and that I could succeed,
and that you could succeed. Exactly. Did it also? It seems like it also shaped the trajectory of sort of your next career, and
well, I went to college. Then I went to college. For real this time. I'm going to college because I want to learn, and I want to do, because I want to be an oceanographer. That's what I thought. I did this oceanography work on the, in the Kuroshio Current. It was so exciting. I want to do this, and so.
And you went on the GI Bill?
Yes. That was the other thing. That was made it possible for me to. To pay my rent every month. And anyway, so I went to college. I met my wife in college. She also wanted to be a marine scientist.
And what college was that?
This is Southampton College. It's a small college, or it was a small college. It was part of the Long Island University, and but now it has become part of the State University of New York. It has been subsumed into Stony Brook, back in those days. It was a very good oceanography school, by the way. Both really good marine science. It was right on the water, Southampton, Long Island. So we had lots of opportunities to get out and do some real marine research. And but the thing was, both of us, me and my wife, we started out to be marine scientists. I hit the wall at chemistry. Mm-hmm. She hit the wall at physics. And we said, maybe we'll just be biologists, So we both became biologists. And I went on, that's why I told you the story about her and working at the Smithsonian. She then went on to work at the EPA. We became environmental people. We did the first Earth Day at our college. The very first Earth Day ever, the one at the beginning of Earth Days. But then I wanted to go on and do more, to go to graduate school. And but my mentor said, you're not really cut out for this science stuff. You're more of a, he said, I could see you working in, in environmental issues, and the kind of environmental issues like land development and stuff like that. So,
now, who was your mentor?
Well, he was a professor at the college. His name was Tom Hairsine.
How great that he was like, sort of telling you your truth.
Right. And I recognized immediately that he was right, because I worried about, I didn't have that kind of detail and concentration for details, and he knew that, and I kind of knew that, and so I ended up going to the University of Pennsylvania to study environmental planning at the School of Landscape Architecture and Regional Planning. And I got a master's degree in regional planning, specializing in environmental planning. And then I became an environmental planner. And I worked in local government and in regional government for many years, until I finally, at the end of my career, I worked at kind of a think tank in Washington, D.C. That specializes in urban land development issues, and I was the environmental director at the think tank, and so I mean, it was not always a smooth sailing through my career, but every time I hit a rocky spot, I ended up in a better place. So my trajectory was always upwards.
It wasn't a straight line.
And it wasn't a straight line. It was very well. And I'm very pleased. And I always attribute the change in my life to what happened to me in the Coast Guard. I mean, and every time I talk to young people who are graduating or whatever, I always have to say, think about the service. I mean, it doesn't. I encourage you to look at the Coast Guard, but any service, you can find your way. You can learn who you are, and learn to find your central, your core. It's wonderful, and really has, as I said, it changed my mind, my life, and I'm very happy I did it. Just because I wanted to go to sea.
That's just amazing. That you started out wanting to go to sea, and then the trajectory that your life took, and then with your environmental planning and your urban planning,
right?
How did not the sea, but how did the water play a role?
Okay, yeah. Most of the time I was in water quality management. I mean, water quality, like surface water, watershed protection, stormwater management. So water was a great integrator. It flows over the land. It flows through the land. It's the embodiment of the earth. I mean, because it's the ocean too. So water has always played a central role in my career.
And then how did you end up here at Westminster-Canterbury?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, because I retired.
And of course, you're by the beautiful Chesapeake Bay.
Exactly, right. Well, I spent a lot of time when I was in. I worked in the Washington metropolitan area at Prince George's County, Maryland, and at the Washington Metropolitan Council of Governments. And our mission primarily through that was to clean up the Potomac River, which back in the 1960s was a travesty. It was a smelly, dark green, flowing mess. And I know I like to think that I made a contribution to what you see when you go by the Potomac now. It's a beautiful, clean, fish-filled river. I mean, I think about back in the day there was just algae, great clumps of algae growing in the Potomac, and now they have fish guides that will take you around Washington D.C. to fish for bass, smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, striped bass. So it's been a dramatic change, so I'm connected to the Chesapeake Bay that way. And we always thought, but that's the big picture was the Chesapeake Bay. We were working on the Potomac, and when I was in Prince George's, also the Patuxent River. But it always focused on the Bay. And but what happened when we started looking around, my wife and I looking, because we knew that we're going to have to find our way through our later years together. There's nobody who's going to take care of us. We're going to have to take care of ourselves. And so we looked around at various retirement communities, and we searched around, and there were a lot of places we liked, but when we came here, we just said, this is it. Look at here's the beach, here's the Chesapeake Bay, here are these urban amenities, because we had lived, after we retired, we lived on the Northern Neck for a while, which was lovely. It's a beautiful rural place, and we loved wildlife. We always have been bird watchers, and we had, in the 7 years we lived there, we had 99 species of birds that we saw from our house, So, but after a while, you need. I'm from New York, and she was from Long Island, Virginia Beach. Just offered all these beautiful amenities, and the beach and the ocean right nearby, and the bay right at our feet. It was a
perfect match.
Yeah, a no-brainer.
So let me ask you this as sort of our final question. How have your history with the water and with environmental science and Earth Day, how have you applied that here at Westminster-Canterbury?
Well, actually, it's been my wife who's done that mostly. I had a different. When I came here, I had something else, which I'll mention to you too. But my wife has been the one who has worked on landscape in the community, and I call her a celebrity because everybody's always stopping her to tell her what a beautiful job she's done with the landscaping, and we've also been concerned about. We can see the runoff going into the bay, and we've talked to folks about how to improve our how we affect the bay, the runoff from our property, and we used to see places where right nearby where you could see water, runoff from the roads and all, and so we've worked. I say we, and Janet deserves most of the credit. Like we have special areas around the property that we can call rain gardens, because water is attracted to these places. Before it drains into the bay, it has to be filtered by these plants, and and not only filters the water but provides beauty for the community. So that's a lovely thing. On the other hand, I came here and I thought to myself, I'm not going to do anything for a year. I'm just going to sit around and watch and wait to see what I'm going to want to do. But what happened when I got here was I found myself thrown into a whole bunch of friends, which had never happened to me before. I've always had struggled to get to be friendly with people, not to be friendly, but to find friends that will last as friends, to find a community of people and often that has centered around church. But but church is a place that comes and goes. You're there sometimes, and then you're back home. And at home, it's hard to find people. The neighbors aren't always the people that you want to be friends with, And so I came here, and after struggling, especially after 7 years on the Northern Neck, where we ended up with like two couples that we were good friends with after 7 years, I came here, and I was astonished at how quickly I became part of a social network and immediately found a whole bunch of friends and people I could be comfortable with and see often. And that's why I stepped in to become to work on the Welcome Committee and to help pay that forward, to bring that to more people. So I've been more socially involved. She's been that's one who's been more physically involved in the environment here.
Well, I will just one little plug for Janet. She's been instrumental in helping convert about a third of our land into native plants to support all those dying bees and butterflies and things.
Well, we have more bees and butterflies now than we used to, and it's beautiful.
So, is there a question that I didn't ask you that you want to answer? Is there something you want to share with us?
Well, I feel like I've shared a lot. And I've managed to sneak in a lot of things that I didn't think I was going to say, too. So
I was going to ask, being in the Pacific a lot of your career, was there any responsibility on your part having to do with, like, Cold War response, that kind of thing?
What kind of response?
Like, there was a Cold War going on.
Oh, Cold War.
You should intercept anything.
No. Well, the only thing we had, I do have another sea story. You totally reminded me of, which when one time we were just called out as part of a exercise to go to Christmas Island in the Pacific Ocean. And this was because this is something I'm trying to recall as I tell it, the United States was, because of the Cold War, was considering renewing nuclear testing. And so the exercise was to go to Christmas Island and pretend that we're going to blow it up and see what happens, and this is with the Navy. It wasn't just us. I mean, it was the Navy. We were part of the Navy exercise. And I think that they also were trying to flush out submarines, Russian submarines, and others, I guess, that may want to snoop on this exercise. So we were there, as part of this, and I got to be a sonarman. This was me living my sonar life, being on sonar watch constantly and looking for submarines. And sometimes we found them, but they went away. What else can you do? I mean,
nobody wants to fire that first shot.
Right. So that was the big Cold War, and we had some other exercises and things, but those were mostly just drills. This one was a real kind of international thing.
Thank you for sharing your life story and your sea stories. And
it's a pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to do this.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Westminster-Canterbury Tales podcast. Thank you for listening.